I'd like to welcome everyone today. We're going to have a conversation with composer Mark Hagerty as well as Chris Hanning. Chris Hanning is a percussionist who joined us on a recording of Mark's piece, Up to the Light. I believe that recording was summer of 2018 or 19, somewhere around there. And today we're going to have a little conversation with Mark and Chris about sort of where this piece came from and what it's all about. So without further ado, Mark, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, when the commission was made, under what circumstances, and maybe a little bit of backbone about the piece.
Sure. So Mélomanie had worked with Chris previously on a piece called Ultraviolet, and everybody enjoyed that. And so an occasion arose where a piece was commissioned for a person who happens to be a friend and supporter of Mélomanie. And that person has led a long and generous and kind of inspiring life. Turning point for him was his unhappy participation in the Vietnam War. But his approach to his life and to healing was to really give, and he's a giving guy in very many realms. And so that's admirable, and it has worked for him. He's also a huge jazz fan. And so that influenced our thoughts a little bit.
So, Chris, of course, you're not only the dean of the Welsh School at Westchester University, but you're also a great percussionist, and you're very well rounded. In reading about your career, it's really incredible to see all the things that you've done. What was it like for you to participate in this project, but also to bring along this sort of what I think of as a little bit of an odd couple between the chime and the vibes?
Well, I was really excited to get another opportunity to play with Mélomanie and having played Up to the Light, which is one of my favorite chamber pieces I've ever done before. Mark brings such a collaborative element to everything that he does. And certainly all the pieces that I've done with him in the past, there's this great sense of collaboration where he's asking me about the instruments. We talk about them. He thinks through like, well, what can I do? How can I mix this with this instrumentation? And so I was really excited. The chime was definitely, I have to say, thinking about all the weird setups I've ever played before, this is definitely up there. I mean, it's great because it's an economy of setup, which for a lot of percussionists, the thing we fear is composers want to put everything in the kitchen sink into the setup, and it takes us longer to set up the piece than to perform it. And so this was just, vibraphone and a lone chime bar. The interesting thing about playing vibraphone and then hitting this chime with a mallet that's this big and a target that's this big, a little scary actually, because you can miss, If you've ever been in front of a golf ball and missed the golf ball, it can feel a lot like that,
Ah, geez, that sounds terrible.
for the fences and you go right by it. But it's a really unique combination of instruments and of quality for this piece. I was really thrilled to get the opportunity to play it.
That's great. That's great. So, Mark, you mentioned about the Vietnam inspiration. I wonder if you could dig into that a little bit more. Tell us maybe how that relates to the title of the piece, Up to the Light. I also wonder about the instrumentation. How does the presence of the chime in particular and the vibraphone relate to what the piece is about?
Right. Well, without being overly programmatic or too literal, the inspiration was the progress of this man's life. For that reason, it starts quite dark. There are three kind of sonorous moments in the piece where everybody's playing and it's as orchestrated as it can be. One at the beginning, which kind of sets this dark tone, one in the middle, which hopes to transition a bit, and one at the end that is more open and brighter and more celebratory and hopefully more full of light. So in very general terms, I wanted to create an arc along those lines. The chime, I have a thing, I love orchestral bells. I think it's a gorgeous sound, and if used properly, it's a beautiful sound in itself, but it also has all these connotations, right? Mm-hmm. And so my hope was that if it came in the right context, it could sound like a death knell, or as at the beginning, or at the end, I hope it sounds more celebratory, like, wedding bells or something more along those lines. As to the vibraphone, that was really inspired mostly by the dedicatee's love for jazz. And I know he likes Milt Jackson. And, and then it was sort of like, well, all right, we keep doing, Mélomanie keeps doing all these interesting combinations, right? They've played with a jazz ensemble. They've played with sitar. They've accompanied urban spoken word poets. So we've done all these interesting things. And I was kind of asking myself, well, what else can we do that would still sound good? The challenge of marrying up the very different sounds of the vibraphone on one hand and the harpsichord on the other just seemed like a really good challenge. So it was a combination of the association with jazz and also this timbral sonic challenge of working that into a Baroque ensemble. They play a lot of new music, but the instrumentation is Baroque.
I find that fascinating. I think over the course of the piece, you really get a sense of trajectory and journey. And I think a big part of that is because we have these, you mentioned those sort of passacalia sections that come in and out of the texture. And through those sections, you have such a, sense of pulse, which then, when you add the chime to that, I find that it creates this sense of inevitability, the passage of time, you might think. And then, of course, you color that with the sound of the vibraphone. But I think also what's interesting is how each of the solos throughout maybe brings into sort of a profile, perhaps different emotional states throughout this journey. Of course, the flute sort of has its thing almost throughout the whole piece. Chris, you're also similarly featured. It's hard for you not to be a feature because whenever you're playing, we want to listen to you. My solo is near the beginning. The cello solo is near the beginning, and it's for me the most triumphant sort of moment in the piece. But each of the solos really develops in a different way. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, Chris, in terms of your solo and what that means. It's obviously a little later in the piece.
Well, it's definitely has a jazz flair to it, and I think the thing that for me it was kind of stepping out of accompanying this ensemble in moments, and then having this moment where it really feels almost like a solo vibraphone piece, and has jazz elements to it, which can be very tricky. And I'll say another thing is just how Mark used the color of the vibraphone in different ways. There are dead strokes on the bars, which give a totally different quality. There are moments where you're letting the pedal ring and doing dead strokes underneath that. There's a moment where you flip the mallets over and you play with the back ends of the sticks, which gives a completely different quality. So he really did a great job of exploring all those sonic possibilities. And the solo it's a challenge to play. I'll say in the recording session, I was fairly nervous doing it, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree about the timbre. When I hear the viola da gamba pizzicatos throughout, I mean, it's really striking how different that is compared to the duo that the violin and gamba are playing, which is very rhythmic. And anyway, it's just really amazing what you do with these different sounds in the piece, Mark.
Well, and your solo is pretty rugged. That's a tough solo that you have.
It's a big one. It took a little extra time in the studio.
Yeah. Well, it came out really well. And you're right. I was using your instrument as kind of a symbol of strength. And especially playing across the strings, playing across all four strings, playing all the double stops and covering the range of the instrument. I have a real love for the cello. I don't know how many pieces I've written for the cello, but I've written 4 solo suites for it. So that tells you something. But it's a very special instrument to me, and I really appreciated what you did with that solo very much.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to play. I mean, I really do love it. That solo in particular I find to be so daring. It's not just full of strength and resolve. It's really daring. That moment, the 16th, the da-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. It just goes and goes. I mean, that's a really exciting part. I love it. I really do. listening to our recording, I was actually shocked to see that it's, I think, 31 minutes long, Up to the Light. I had no idea. In the course of recording and performing, no one's ever really thinking how long is this piece. But when I actually was listening to it, I noticed that pacing is just so great, and I think it has to do with the solos. Having such a sense of completeness and the passacaglia. So it's really quite a nicely shaped emotional journey through time, which is really great. And we should also mention that this piece is going to be appearing on Mark's new CD by the same title, Up to the Light. Mark, can you tell us what's on your CD and maybe when we can expect to buy it at our nearest Barnes & Noble?
Well, yeah. So this CD is actually kind of a compendium of the larger pieces that I've done with Mélomanie. She tried to count the pieces, and depending on how you count, I've probably worked with Mélomanie about 8 times over a period of almost 2 decades.
Wow.
So this is a real in-depth, long-term collaboration for both parties. And I wanted to try to capture the 4 larger pieces in a double CD. So it's a double CD. It contains 2 pieces that are independently recorded by Mélomanie. So those are to some extent repeats, but first piece is Trois Rivières, 3 Rivers, which includes an extra, it's all Baroque instruments and includes a second Baroque flute. And that is on their first CD called Fluorescence. And then for their currently pending and soon to be released CD Ultraviolet, the piece Ultraviolet, featuring guest artist Christopher Hanning. Then we did a fun project a few years ago with Icelandic, New York-based violinist Eva Ingolf, and we did arrangements of Icelandic folk songs for Mélomanie plus extra violin. And some of them are religious songs, and some of them are really primitive folk songs. So there's a suite of 6 Icelandic songs arranged for Mélomanie, and then Up to the Light.
That's great. That's great. Chris, I know you've worked with Mark many times, and I hope Mélomanie gets to work with you many more times to come. It was certainly a pleasure to get to record this with you and to work with Mark. I have to say, Mark, that you're probably aware of this, but this was one of my very first major projects that I did with Mélomanie, because I had only recently joined the group when we undertook this several recording projects, really. And so I really had quite a crash course in the Mark Hagerty compendium of music. So it's been really a pleasure getting to know you both as artists, but also to play with you and to record this music. So I want to thank you both for joining me. And thanks for your contributions to this great music and creation of that great music. And we'll look forward to hearing it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ismar.
Thanks.